This is the story of the longest crocodile ever caught, the man who examined it, and his search for other giants.
So we're here today with the legendary Rom Whitaker. Rom, thank you so much for being here today to talk about giant crocodiles.
My pleasure.
Of course, your interest in giant crocodiles started with this giant right here, the Obo giant in the Fly River of Papua New Guinea. But you kind of think that this giant skull here was the start of your love for giant crocodiles in a way.
Yeah, it goes pretty far back. And both of my kids, my grown sons, who are grown now. So this was quite a long time ago at the New York Natural History Museum. Yeah, I mean, that just blew me away to see this monster of monsters. It was incredible.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you too. So, when people are younger, they're not going into the scientific literature. They're reading kind of, those generalized books for more general audiences. Did you think that when you just started your love of reptiles, was your opinion like a lot of other people thinking that these 20-foot crocodiles were more commonplace than what they actually were?
Yeah, my first love of reptiles was snakes, and I sort of graduated to crocodiles later on when I got into this. I started doing surveys around India looking at the crocodile situation. They were always there in the background. Reptiles in general were my love. But I didn't seriously get into crocodiles until I realized that they were going extinct in India. And that sort of really got me started. And then I sort of delved into the fact, okay, so where are the big ones? Have we lost all the giant genes, you might say? Or are there still some 20-footers out there? And people keep writing to me, or we keep talking to people. Say, yeah, it was longer than my boat. And my boat's 24 feet long. Yeah, all right. I want to put a measuring tape to that crocodile before you start, gassing about how big it was.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I didn't believe half the stories I heard. Or, no, I didn't believe most of the stories that I heard.
Okay, cool. So before this crocodile was caught, it seemed that it did have a little bit of a history with the village it had. And George Craig actually attempted a few times to try and capture this crocodile. Did you have any communication with George Craig about what this crocodile was like? Was it a man-eater? Was it just kind of hanging out, near the village?
Well, I only met George once, and that was at the Whitaker Croc Farm where I was working in Papua New Guinea back in 1980. And we talked about crocodiles in general. We didn't talk about this animal specifically. It hadn't died yet when I met him. So it was only later on when I wrote to him and he, sent me this photograph. And, I didn't realize that, the croc had a name and a history, really. As far as I know, he wasn't a man-eater, but just a big, well-known animal. I mean, the biggest croc around, according to the villagers. That's all I knew about it.
Okay, interesting. And then eventually, this crocodile did unfortunately die. And I just want to ask you, how did you initially hear about this crocodile?
Well, the guy that's in the photograph there, the white guy, is Jerome Montague, who is a UN volunteer at Lake Murray. And we were doing surveys together on the Fly River, the Strickland River, and and some of the tributaries, looking at croc numbers, getting a handle on the population, because we were involved in promoting the crocodile skin industry. And when he heard about this croc having died, very unfortunately drowned itself in a small net. I mean, it was amazing, just a small barramundi net that the villagers had set, and obviously had caught a couple of barramundi, and this big old guy probably grabbed one, got himself tangled, probably tried to do a death roll, and really rolled himself up in the net and drowned. It wouldn't take very long for him to drown once he's inhaled water. So it was a real sad way to go.
Wow. So who was part of the team that helped, measure the skin and the skull?
Well, the skull and the skin were there, ready for us, and they had they had skinned it out as though they were skinning it for a belly skin for commercial sale. But by that time, the law had come into effect that any skin which had a belly width of over 50 centimeters was illegal, and this thing was far more than 50 centimeters. So in a way, I guess the crocodile project, the government, I I don't want to use the word confiscate, but they did take it and sent it off for tanning to Japan, and the skull went to the wildlife office. So we actually measured it right on site, right there at the village, both the skull and the skin.
That's awesome. And got some more pictures here of the skin and the you with the skull and Instagram. So obviously the coloration of the ventral scales look a little bit different here in this photo. Was it just the skin kind of drying out more that lost coloration?
Yeah, yeah. This one that we're looking at now, the skin was quite a bit drier. That
Okay.
was it had been very well salted. Once we realized that it was, a very precious thing, that we wanted to make sure that it was well preserved, and the villagers didn't want to. I want to say with the word waste salt on it because they knew that it was an illegal skin. So when we got it to Whitaker, we salted it down really properly, and that's why it looks so different, so much drier.
Oh, okay. Concerning the total length, I know just said it was salted, so the skin had shrunk a bit, and it was missing some of the tail tip. You thought that at least 10 centimeters or so was missing from the total length of the crocodile. Do you think it's possible that it may have been longer than 630 centimeters for its true length?
I think if my memory serves me right, we sort of measured the width of the scutes down toward the tail there, and made a pretty accurate, I would say, accurate estimate of what was missing, and that gave us the total.
Okay.
And the fact that it was over 20 feet long I was happy with that because this is the first one that we really had positive evidence of. There are so many reports, 20-footer, 25-footer, 30-footer, but here was a real 20-footer, and we were the fortunate ones to have measured it once.
So did you know, like, right after you got that total measurement that this was indeed like a real significant animal?
Oh, yeah. I mean, already we had realized that, we were in we were in the middle of the crocodile industry, and people were continually writing to us, including Guinness Book of Records people, and people from all over, talking about big crocodiles. So, once we realized we had a 20-footer, we knew we had something here. We were it was very pleasing. I mean, it was very sad that the animal died, but it was very pleasing to know that a 20-footer does exist. That was exciting.
Yeah, and speaking of Guinness, this was really interesting. This photo or two photos that you sent me. What was Guinness's reaction to, this 20-footer compared to like other historical claims?
Yeah, I actually, that's a very good question, but I didn't get in touch with the Guinness people after that. It was Eric Volson who was in touch with them, the person to whom this letter was addressed. He was also on the Croc project with us, but I never did follow up with the Guinness Book people, and I really don't know what their reaction was.
Yeah, I read the book that Gerald Wood produced or made after sending this in. It's interesting, because I remember you said in Who's Got the Biggest that this claim didn't exactly shake the world. People still thought that 20-foot crocodiles were commonplace and, pretty almost like a regular occurrence. When I read the book, as significant as this actually was, in his book, it was just like a little side note. It was just like, there was this 6.2 meter saltwater crocodile found in Papua New Guinea. It wasn't really delved into much or like the significance of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact that we had one was very exciting to us.
Yeah. And this is your son with the skull, right?
Yep, here he is, I think 1.5 years old, and this was not such a huge salty. It was about a 17 or 18 footer.
Okay. Yeah, the reason bring him up is you and your son worked on the paper Who's Got the Biggest. So did he naturally kind of begin his kind of appreciation and love of giant crocodiles, or was it kind of in a way forced based on, your profession?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think anyone whose son sort of is born and brought up at a crocodile facility, the way Nikhil was at the Madras Crocodile Bank, and he's still there as the director of research. I mean, you don't know, did I twist his arm to hang on to this job, or no, he's totally there. He's enjoying himself every day. So yeah, there's no question of the fact that he's a real croc man all the way from the time he was 1 year old.
Oh, that's great. So, how long after, looking over the Obo giant specimen did you begin your search for, looking into other giant crocodile claims and the giant skulls?
It had never left me. I mean, I was always looking around for it. I was very lucky. The picture that we're seeing here on the far left is the crocodile that was killed in the 30s, I think, in the state of Odisha, which is the northeastern part of India, where there's a large mangrove swamp where there's quite a few salties still left. And it was shot by a boat captain there, and they claimed that they measured it. I think they said that it was 23 feet long, and it doesn't add up if you look at the ratios and stuff like that. But we'll never know. I mean, that's the big problem with you. In a museum collection, invariably you have skulls, but you very rarely have a whole skeleton. Excuse me, I just have to shut a dog up.
You're all good.
Okay, so that's okay.
So, obviously you went through several different types of organizations and people to, get the right information. How hard was it kind of assembling all the information, places to look for these giants, places that had these giant skulls? How much of a task was that?
It was quite a task. I mean, I'm not the kind of person who is very enamored of going to museums and sort of putting tapes onto crocodiles. So I really depended on a lot of very helpful people around the world. And they're the ones who did most of the work. Yeah. I mean, I'm more of a field person, and I like to go out there and find those big ones out in the wild if I can. I know that I wouldn't be able to measure them, but at least to see them would be the exciting thing for me. So yeah, there was a lot of people from around the world who did a lot of help, and it was just by accident the crocodile on the far right turned out to be the record now croc, and we had no idea. There was just this warehouse at the Arba Minch crocodile farm in Ethiopia, and there was a little room, and they were full of dusty skulls. We realized that, man, these are big skulls for now crocs. But until Nikhil and my son and I put a tape measure to them, we didn't. Then we realized, hey man, these are the record size now crocs, because we had checked with other people in other parts of Africa and Zimbabwe and all who had measured skulls, and we had some records from them. Yeah. And this one that I'm opening the mouth of is turned out to be the record size.
That's awesome. So speaking of skulls, part of the paper part of what you talked about in the paper was kind of the 1-to-7 ratio, and brought up a few skulls here, animals that kind of conflict with that 1-to-7 ratio. So here we've got Jaws, which was one of your crocodiles. We have the longest Temissima skull, and then the Bujang Senong skull that was verified recently. So did you have any indication before you started your study or started the paper that the 1-to-7 rule wasn't exactly concrete?
Well, no, I really didn't. I just sort of accepted it as something. I mean, the people who had sort of put this out and published it were all, top scientists and people I respected. So I didn't really think twice about it. But then we had Jaws, who's up there getting captured to remove it to another pen, and so we had a live 16-foot crocodile, and we had this. We could measure his head and measure his total length, and the ratio turned out much different. It was closer to 1.8 something, 1 to 8, I should say. And so we realized then that, yeah, it's very definitely going to be much different for the very big crocodiles. The ratio is going to be very different, not 1.1 to 7.
Mm-hmm. And then on the opposite end of that, you have the Temiscama skull here, and it was interesting because I talked with Colin Stevenson because he's really into Temiscama, and he told me that there were some overestimates actually with the skull, and when you sent this photo in, I didn't realize that they actually thought originally it was 23 feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tomistoma is very possibly the longest of all the crocodiles in the world. It's hard to say now. We've probably lost the biggest ones, but it would be really nice. And we've been talking to Bhutan young Capricorn in Thailand, and hopefully someday they'll get down and measure some of those giants that they have alive in their croc farm in Bangkok.
Oh, that'd be great. So this is more of a technical question. Some people want me to ask you this. So this is old Charlie. He was a crocodile killed in 1974 in the Mary River in Australia. And this was actually mentioned in the Webb and Messel's paper in 1978. This was a 20-footer. And they were just wondering, who's got the biggest paper, the length was 64.4 centimeters. People were just wondering if you measured that via DCL-A or the dorsal cranial length B?
That's a very good question. I think we were doing DCL-A almost on all the crocs that we did.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
So people were just wondering because in the paper Webb and Messel had the length was originally 66.6. So there was people that were just wondering like how much the skull potentially could have shrunk over that time if it was, especially if it was measured in that same method.
Yeah, there is a bit of talk of that shrinkage, of course, would not definitely happen over the years.
Yeah.
So perhaps not very much, but enough to make a difference if you're looking for records, comparisons.
So this was in your documentary, Supersized Crocs, and you definitely used some interesting techniques to try to figure out the lengths of some crocodilians. What did you think, looking back, what did you think about, the method of using yourself to measure the crocodiles and especially the laser range finding equipment?
That was really cool. We did the idea of me sort of lying down on the beach there as kind of a joke kind of a TV sort of special, but using the rangefinder was an incredibly great idea, and it still should be perfected and can be perfected, because very often you're going to see these big crocs. You don't want to shoot them just to get their total length, but you can get a very accurate total length out of it. So this is a very, very good method.
So do you believe that this crocodile here, the Nile crocodile, was around 18 feet?
Yeah.
Awesome. So Guinness especially has been claiming that the largest crocodiles are in Bitarkanika National Park. I know you went out there for Monster Quest to try to find some monsters. Do you think there's any truth to like the 20 to 23 foot claims that they're saying?
I don't know where they get their information. It's kind of funny because you're supposed to respect something like Guinness Book of Records, like that. But they don't really pin anything down to verify their claim. Certainly, wherever saltwater crocodiles are found, there definitely could be that huge one. Like Lolong was in the Philippines, and that's another place where saltwater crocodiles are found. So that was another real. So I can neither say I doubt it or it's not possible, nor can I say yes, it's definitely true. There's just no proof. And again, they're just doing the same thing that we heard all these years. It was bigger than the boat or whatever. Somebody told them that the biggest ones are there, and they believed it for some reason or the other.
I know this picture here in the bottom middle you saw in person during the documentary. How big do you think that one was? Yeah.
It was a good 17 or 18 feet long. It was a big salty for sure, but it wasn't a 20-footer.
Yeah. And you didn't see anything that could have possibly indicated like a 20-footer in the documentary?
Well, just like we saw in the film we did, Supersized Crocs, for we saw tracks and slide marks which looked massive. We didn't see the animal though, and just to see a slide, and you can infer stuff by measuring the slide and measuring the belly width of a crocodile, but no, there's nothing like putting a tape to the animal itself. That's the only real proof you're going to have.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Bitarkanika crocodiles, some people wanted me to ask you, saltwater crocodiles are pretty well known for their reduced post-occipital scutes, but the Bitarkanika crocodiles, they have some pretty, defined post-occipitals. People want me to ask you if you had, any information on that, if you think possibly there's, subspecies within Crocodylus porosus or even potentially like a cryptic species complex.
That's a good point. Typically when you have a reptile or an animal that's spread across the range that this saltwater crocodile is spread across, all the way from here all the way to the Philippines, I mean halfway across the world, chances are sure there's a very good chance that there are some subspecies or even different species there. I'm not sure if anyone's done the DNA work on this, but it would be it's a very interesting point. And whenever we did see a salty with a couple of extra of those scoots, we had the same thoughts. Yeah, but it's going to take one of those crazy taxonomists who spends hours and hours looking through microscopes and looking at DNA stuff to figure that one out.
Yeah. So now crocodiles, you've obviously had some success there in Lake Chamo, but more recently there's been some attention to the Mara River. There's, obviously nothing substantial, but they're claimed that there's 18 to 20 footers out there. Was this location, was it brought to your attention at all when you were looking for areas to look for giant crocodiles in Africa?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's the most dramatic sort of crocodile predation footage that exists on film, and there are some really massive crocodiles. Again, where is the opportunity to put a tape to one of these, and that's the only thing that's going to prove. I admit they are very impressive. They're very huge crocodiles, but are they 20 feet long? I can't answer that.
Mm-hmm. So what made Lake Chamo kind of an area to prioritize when you were looking for giant crocodiles?
It was kind of serendipitous, really, because we had heard about Lake Chamo, and we wanted to include it. We wanted to include one of the African hotspots for Nile crocodiles in this film, Supersized Crocs, and the terrain, the beauty of the place, and the fact that it was relatively unknown. It's not famous like the Mara and other places. Just appealed to all of us, the filmmakers and myself. So we went there, and we just spent just a week there during the filming. But while I was there, being a sort of a rodent, if you want to say, about data, I started, sort of writing down how many crocs we were spotting and where they were and where the concentrations were. So I wrote to African Parks, the people who were running the show there, the Dutch company, which helps some of these African national parks when they're having a financial squeeze or any other problem, and they're helping them to get up to speed. I wrote to them and say that a lot more can be done there, and I believe that the fisheries is actually causing a lot of problems, and I believe that the trophy hunting is also causing problems in the sense that they're taking out the biggest crocs when you've got a place, a touristic destination, which is unbelievable with these huge crocodiles basking there. So shouldn't we do something about it? So they invited my son Nikhil and I over there for a couple of months. I think back in 2006. And that's when we spent the time there we did night surveys and day surveys to do a proper census, which hadn't been done for about 20 years. And that's the time when we discovered this treasure trove of giant skulls in a sort of dusty room. So it was just pure fluke that we got there, but I'm really happy we did. What a place. An incredible place.
Well, it's awesome. You definitely found some cool stuff there. So some people want me to ask you too, was the supposed 20-footer Gustav brought up to your attention at all, or did you even seriously consider him when you were looking for giants?
Again, there are, several stories about Gustav and, other crocs in different parts of the world, which have been great to follow up. We couldn't do all of them, obviously. But so I guess I must confess that we just didn't get around to doing all of them that we heard about. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Would you, if you had the time, definitely have tried to look for him?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing I actually learned recently, one of the croc experts that was part of the documentary, Mark Onswana, he obviously saw Gustav in person, and he actually saw Lolong in person, a true 20-footer. And someone asked him, comparing Gustav to Lolong, do you think that he was 20 foot? And he thought, at least based on, visual observation, which of course isn't perfect, but he thought there was a good likelihood that Gustav was 20 foot compared to what he saw Lolong in person.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good to know. I mean, I'm an experienced person to hear something like that. But again, it's just nothing like getting that tape measure down.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the same at all.
Yeah.
So obviously, kind of along the same lines of stories and such, how was it kind of filtering through, the historical photos, the stories of hunters, and just kind of vetting out what seemed legitimate and what didn't seem legitimate?
Well, hunters have a tendency to exaggerate, just like fishermen. And, it was that big. And, and these photographs are evidence, particularly the ones, for example, hanging from the top of that winch. I mean, that is really a massive crocodile. And it does look like it could be 20 feet long. Yeah. But how are we going to tell? And you can say, okay, the man was 5 foot 10 inches, and sort of, but was he a little bit behind or a little bit ahead of the croc? I mean, you could do all sorts of fiddling and figure it out exactly how long it was. I think we came up to something like 17 and a half feet for that one, by the way. But it's just the one that's where the one is in the foreground down in the middle there. Well, I mean, if I catch a fish, I usually hold it right toward the camera. And wow, you've got such a big fish. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just a question of the angle.
Yeah. So kind of along the same lines, so a little bit more credible. So there's hunting organizations such as Safari Club International, which based on some people that I got in contact with, the picture in the top middle seems to be the record for Safari Club International. This was an 18-footer. Do you think organizations like that, they are credible sources for these giant crocodile claims?
Yeah, I would say so. They're usually, especially if it's, as sort of high profile an organization as that, they measure their horns and lengths of crocodiles and horns of kudus and stuff like that in a proper scientific way, because they have to publish these results. So yeah, they're probably quite accurate. And it's interesting you're asking that, because none of them have come up with a 20-footer, which is, pretty important, a pretty important thing.
Mm-hmm. And another thing too, so the bottom right picture of the American crocodile, I wanted to know what your opinion was, and obviously it's still, the origin of this is still being looked into, but I actually spoke with Joe Wazalewski about it, and he said, actually got to talk to him in person about this photo. He said that he thinks that there is actually a more complete photo of the crocodile, and that I think it was Peter Taylor's the one that found it originally, but he's going to try to use the man's boot here, since it's somewhat on the same visual plane as the head, to try to find the total length of the animal. So we'll see where that goes potentially.
Yeah. No, this was pretty interesting because we always thought that salties and Nile crocs were the biggest, and we hadn't thought about Tomastoma, nor had we ever thought about American crocs being close to some, the same size as some of the huge ones. But them and the Orinoco croc both could very well be the 20-foot crocs that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. So when the pictures of Lolong were just released several decades after you examined the Obo giant, did you think before he was officially measured that this could be a true 20-footer?
It sure looked it. Yeah. I mean, again, the claims, of course, were outrageous. I think they claimed that it was much bigger than 20 feet before they actually put a tape to it.
Mm-hmm.
But once they did measure it, wow, that was quite an incredible find.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting that they said the stories about some of the stories that came from some of the hunters I heard through some other friends saying that this was a crocodile who never came out to bask anywhere. He would just float very high in the water and bask, using his just absorbing the sunlight
Mm-hmm.
through his back, through his scutes. And it was a very interesting. The point was nobody had ever seen him exit the water, actually come out and bask, although he was a pretty well-known fellow.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, of course, it's interesting. So, I've do nuisance alligator trapping. It's kind of, the same thing. You catch a crocodilian, even if it's huge, and you'll still get people saying that there's a bigger one out there. And so with Lolong, of course, there was the claim that, there's another one out there that was like, I think 29 to 30 foot long. Wow. And, it's obviously that's not substantiated, but it's just interesting. Even though you get a true giant, you still have the people out there that think, no, this actually is like too small. Like, because the claim was, of course, that he was killing some villagers, and people were thinking that he was too small and that there was still this bigger one out there.
Yeah, could be.
So this one's kind of caught some attention recently. It's been dubbed the Port Blair Giant online. I was just wondering if you possibly looked at this specimen. There's no size claim tied to it. It was just shot on video in Port Blair. But I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this, if you looked at the video before.
No, this is the first time I'm hearing about it, actually. And I should have heard about it, since we have been running a field station there for the last 20 years. But no, I haven't heard about this guy. I mean, there are stories, of course, of giant crocs, but this particular one I haven't heard. Man, he looks mighty fat.
No, he's definitely fat, which I made a video about this guy, and I was just kind of speaking because, there's people that think he's obviously like a 20-footer and this and that. And it's like, visually, I mean, he's obviously, on the thicker side, but a bigger crocodile, just in terms of overall mass, doesn't necessarily mean a longer one. So there's obviously that visual illusion there that potentially, he could be 20 foot. You never know. But at the same time, it's like, it's hard to say. And then obviously, looking at how wide he is, that's kind of give in to the thought that he could be like a true monster.
Right.
So just over the years you've spent looking for these giants, based on the evidence you've seen, what's the longest you think modern species of crocodilians could have gone to, including historical times before mass hunting?
That's a really good question, and it's kind of hard to answer. The thing is, I just go back to the Tomastoma argument that it could be that that's the animal we should be looking at for the biggest of all, but it's really hard to say. I would kind of guess that since we do have proper measurements of two 20-footer Lolong and the Obo croc, that 25 feet is not an unusual possibility. I mean, that is definitely in the realm of possibility. Beyond that, it's anybody's guess.
Yeah. So you do think that there is a legitimate chance that 25-foot crocodiles could have existed at one time?
Could have existed, and actually there could still be one out there, but
Okay.
it's he's probably keeping very, very well hidden.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that beyond the Obo croc, that, based on your own observations and doing your surveys, that were there any crocodiles that you looked at and you thought, okay, this very well could have been a 20-footer, like in person?
Usually when we were doing our surveys, we were doing night counts and we were looking at eye shines, and we were very rarely seeing the whole crocodile. And the best evidence that we got was seeing a huge mudslide, and that was always we got out there and got waded through that slush all the way up to our waist, sometimes in the thick mud, and took measurements of some of those, and sort of using captive crocs and their belly width and stuff like that, started making all sorts of crazy estimates on what we had found. But we never really pinned down anything that I would say was a 20-footer. No, that skin of the Obo croc was really the most staggering and the most obvious and the most exciting find that we had made in all those years.
Yeah, awesome. So do you think over the years you spent looking at all these giant claims that your belief of crocodilians in the modern age being over 20 foot has strengthened or lessened over time?
Sorry, just repeat that.
So just the years that you've spent looking at, all the skulls, obviously looking at the Obo giant Lolong, the visual estimates that you've tried to do in, laser range finding equipment using yourself. Do you think your belief in crocodilians still being alive today that are 20 foot has strengthened or lessened over time?
Well, I mean, the fact that those two crocs that are confirmed 20-footers sort of reaffirms my faith in, I won't sort of be so dismissive when people come up and say it was 20 feet long. I'll just gently and politely say, well, let's get a tape to it. Just saying that it's 20 feet and saying that it's longer than your boat isn't enough for me. And looking at the skulls and doing ratios and stuff like that, it's still not enough for me, because there are crocs which will grow outwards rather than lengthwise, just the way humans do. I mean, we find ourselves growing outwards as we get older rather than getting any taller. So it's similar with crocs.
Yeah. So one last question is, why do you think it's important to look into these giant crocodile claims?
I think it's very important. I using the term that I used when we first started talking, the giant gene. I think the giant gene has been hunted out in so many species of animals on Earth, because this is what the hunters look for, either for ivory or for meat, or in the case of the crocodile, for the biggest one. So I think it's really important that we try to preserve that giant gene. And I'm not sure why, but I just feel in my bones that it's a very, very important thing that we should hang on to these giant crocodiles.
To learn more about the man you just saw, read the book Snakes, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. From his early childhood of catching his first snake to his time in India, learn the origin of one of the greatest naturalists alive today, written in an easygoing conversational tone with a fast-paced medley of personal experiences. Snakes, Drugs, and Rock and Roll is a vivid tell-all memoir that offers an intimate, irreverent self-portrait of one of India's most eminent naturalists and conservationists. Covering the first 25 years of his life, the book delves into his fascination with snakes and his rebellious rock and roll-filled youth. Available on Amazon now in digital formats, with paperback pre-orderable now with release on November 5th. Link in comments and description to buy.
I came out with this book, and I came out with this title, Snakes, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, for several obvious reasons. I've been hung up on snakes since I was 4 years old. There's a picture within this book of me when I'm 4 years old holding a milk snake. My mother took that picture. And I was just so lucky that I had a weird mother who said, when I brought the snake home, she said, wow, how beautiful. How many mothers would say to a kid who brings a snake home, how beautiful? They would usually say, get it out of here. I mean, that would be the standard reaction. So from age 4 onwards, and she wonderfully would tell. We were living in northern New York State at the time, and then when we sometimes visited her sister, my aunt in New York City, and stayed with her, the main thing I wanted to do was go to the New York Natural History Museum and look at all the exhibits and the dinosaurs and the snakes, of course. So that's how my career started. As far as the drugs are concerned, I was in the United States during the 60s, and I know there's a joke that says, if you can remember the 60s and you weren't there. Let me tell you, I was in the U.S. Army at the time, and I was sort of an anti-war freak. I didn't really approve of America and its adventures in Vietnam, and thousands, or I'd say close to 1 million people getting killed. So, I don't know, just experimenting with psychedelic drugs seemed to be the right thing to do at that time. And rock and roll, that's been in my soul since way back. In fact, my wife she's just, I forget something, which happens when you're 80 years old, you sort of have a bit of memory loss. And she says, yeah, you forgot that, but you remember every bloody song that you remember hearing from 50 years ago. And it's true, I've got a fantastic memory for all the songs that I heard way back when. So a lot of my adventures are in this book, but it only covers the first 25 years of my life. So we've got 2 more volumes to go.
That sounds great. Well, Rom will definitely include a link in the description of the video so people can check out the book. But thank you so much for talking, and it's been great talking giant crocodiles with you.
You too, Jake. Thanks very much for this opportunity.